Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be here. I'm honored that I was invited to come and speak here. This is exactly the kind of gathering I like to address, because really we've got to bridge this gap between academia and the practical world. You know, in the academic world, we get off in our little ivory tower and we have to do replicated scientific trials, which are not necessarily what growers need. We need to take the principles that we might be looking at and trying to understand in the world of academia and translate them into practical, real-world applications. How do you take the principles and actually use them to reduce your costs, to reduce all the problems and the difficulties, the lack of fertility? How do you use that information to get rid of the pests and the diseases? How do you keep water in your soil? How do you keep nutrients in your soil so we don't lose any of those materials downstream? We harm nobody downstream from your farm. We should hold all those nutrients, all that water on farm. Because if you lose them, then you're going to have to replace them. So how do we take the principles of what we've been finding out about with the soil food web and apply them to the practical world? So this morning's talk is really to introduce you into the principles with a few bits and pieces of practical applications sneaking in there. But you have to understand the principles first. What makes soil productive? And principles that work no matter where you are on this planet. And I suspect I will be shocking a number of people as I relate the discoveries that we've made over the last 45 years that I've been working out there in the real world. So bridging that gap. Yes, I do have the academic alphabet soup after my name. Woohoo! So undergraduate, master's, PhD, I've postdoced. I am currently the president of Soil Food Web, a company I started after I ran smack into my university's, Oregon State University's, absolute dedication to Monsanto. So, not my favorite people, Monsanto. There was supposed to be a pointer up here someplace. I don't see it. So anyway, if you need to get hold of me, there it is, soilfoodweb@aol.com. I can't promise you that I'm going to answer immediately. I get on average about 300 emails a day. And I have help answering all those emails, so we will hopefully get back to you. If we don't respond, send the email again, because it's probably been buried. So a little bit of my background. I think you can probably read this better than I can read it myself. So my undergraduate degree, I am a Minnesota girl, and every once in a while you can hear the accent in my voice when I talk. Good Scandinavians in that part of the world, and so that Scandinavian lilt to that accent. Went from St. Olaf College to Texas A&M, so suddenly discovered that not everybody had to deal with 12 feet of snow in the wintertime, and I've never gone back. As a result. Winter in Minnesota? Oh, no. So from Colorado State, from Texas A&M, where I worked in marine microbiology, where I started discovering some of the principles applied to aquatic systems, and then moved into soil at Colorado State University. Postdoc there, where we really figured out why do we have all these species of bacteria in the soil? And they're different. Every place you go on the planet, if the ecosystem is different, we have a whole set of different species of bacteria and fungi. Fungi are not just bad guys. I've always been amazed that people say, well, fungi just cause disease. Really? Is that true? Apparently those people who say that can't read, because they could not possibly ask that question if they had come and listened to a talk like this, for example. What do protozoa do in your soil? Do you need them? Are they important? What do they do? Well, you're not growing plants without protozoa. Ooh, so you need them. Okay, what's the function? How does that work? And I want to briefly go over these facts. Nematodes. There should be only beneficial nematodes in your soil. If you've got root feeders, Mother Nature is trying to send you a message. You don't have soil, you've got the four-letter D word in the world of soil science, dirt. You have dirt. See, you have to say it with just that kind of disdain, dirt. If you don't have the proper biology, you're not dealing with soil, you're dealing with dirt, and you can't possibly grow the plants that you want to grow if you're dealing with dirt. What's the difference between soil and dirt? Soil requires the presence of the living organisms in your soil. You must have bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, mycorrhizal fungi, all those cute little creepy crawlies in the soil. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to grow those plants as you want, where you are going to get the maximum benefit. So, understanding the role and function of all of those organisms. Well, what do organisms need in order to stay alive? Think of yourself. What do we have to supply to you 3 times a day, basically, every day that you're alive and living on this planet? You need food. Microorganisms in the soil, they're just like you. Think of yourself as being a rod-shaped bacterium on a much larger scale. That's all we are. We're just like bacteria. If you wouldn't do tillage to yourself, don't till your soil and kill your microorganisms. Don't slice and dice your fungi. Don't destroy this biology that's present in your soil. Every single inorganic fertilizer is going to be killing these organisms in your soil. Every single pesticide kills way more of the beneficial organisms than you do of the disease causers. If you go out and you nuke your soil with a pesticide, you're going to knock down all of the organisms, the bad guys as well as the good guys, but who comes back faster? The bad guys. So what have you set the stage for in your soil? Once you use a pesticide, who's growing? And good luck having a good crop. So we have to reverse that trend. The only reason the Green Revolution worked is because we had already destroyed this biology in our soil and turned our soil into dirt. So how do we reverse that trend? So those are some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. Briefly, to get a little bit more in-depth, all day Thursday I will be talking about more practical approaches to how do we put this biology back into your soil? Where do you get the organisms from? How are you going to manage that? Because probably through no fault of your own, you've perhaps listened to people that told you the only way to grow plants is to kill things. And so now you're going to have to put this biology back into the soil. How do you nurture it? How do you keep it present? And of course, when we think about that definition of soil, we've got to have organisms. We've got to have organic matter to grow those organisms. And we have to have the sand, the silt, the clay, the rocks, the pebbles, the parent material. That's the true definition of soil as defined by the father of soil science, Hans Jenny. And unless you have all of those components, it's not soil, it's dirt. So understanding those principles, let's go through a nice little framework. I think John has put these slides on the internet, so you can go and download them. So I think that's available. If you haven't discovered where they are, talk to John. And I have to say that without John Medley's time and effort getting me here, I wouldn't be here today, because it's been a little bit of a challenge to deal with all of the work to get the schedule set up right. So taking a look at the soil food web. And please realize that before 1986, most scientists had no idea that all of these organisms were important and that they had a role in making sure your plant stayed healthy. So when we're looking at, I wish the pointer. Oh, I gotta do, I can't see that. Oops. Pointer? It suddenly appeared. It was a snake, it would have bit me. Oh my. Can you see the little red, can you see the red dot? Oh, because I can't. So sunlight, photosynthesis, plants make sugar. Most of the sugars from photosynthesis are translated down into the root system. So over 50% of the energy of any plant we care about is going to be translocated down into the root system and stays in the root system or the soil. Your plant is putting out exudates into that soil, food to feed the organisms. Isn't that a wonderful scientific term? Exudates. What does that mean? What's an exudate? See, this, scientists, we like to invent language so that only other scientists in my specialty area of expertise know what I'm talking about, so that you have to come and hire me to explain what's going on. Money drives the world. Isn't it wonderful? So what's an exudate? So an exudate is basically made of mostly sugar, a little bit of protein, and a little bit of carbohydrate. Ooh, great. That didn't help much, did it? If I asked you to go into your kitchen and make a recipe of mostly sugar, a little bit of protein, and a little bit of carbohydrate, how many different kinds of foods am I asking you to make? Okay, so what's sugar in your kitchen? White sugar, brown sugar, honey, molasses, syrup. So any one or all, or what's the mixture and percentages of those different kinds of sugars? So take your bowl and start putting that mix in there. What's protein in your kitchen? Well, milk, eggs, maybe a little cheese. So think of the combinations, all the different kinds of mixes of sugars and proteins. And then, of course, what's carbohydrate in your kitchen? Flour. So we're going to put a lot of sugar, a little bit of protein, eggs, milk, and a little bit of flour. What is that a recipe for? Cakes and cookies. Your plant is dumping cakes and cookies out into the soil in order to feed these microorganisms. So where do we find most of the bacteria and most of the fungi? And if you follow the little arrows here, those exudates coming out into the soil are going to feed bacteria, and they're going to feed fungi. So the highest concentration, the most species diversity of bacteria and fungi exist in the soil around the roots of your plants. Now, are those plants going to be putting out exudates that feed the bad guys, that feed the diseases and the pests and the problem organisms? Well, if your plant put out foods that fed the bad guys, what's going to happen to your plant? It's dead. It's gone. End of evolutionary story. No seeds made. So these exudates are strictly things that are going to grow the beneficial bacteria and fungi in that soil. And so most of the bacteria and fungi around those root systems, they're building castle walls to protect your roots against diseases and pests and problem organisms. Most of the time, your bad guy organisms won't even know your roots are there. But you have to have all of those bacterial species and fungal species present in your soil. So when the root grows through, putting out the exudates, contacting those organisms, they will start to multiply and grow and completely protect your plant from any disease and pest. If you no longer have any diseases or pests attacking the root systems of your plants, do you need pesticides? Is this going to save you money? Exactly. Let's get these beneficial organisms mixed back into our soil. Where are you going to find this massive diversity of the indigenous bacteria and fungi that your plants require to protect their root systems? Where are you going to find them? You're going to grow your own compost, because that organic matter that you put into your compost pile contains all of the species of local organisms. You put that organic matter into that pile and you compost correctly, and you're going to end up in 21 days, if you do it right, 21 days, you now have an inoculum of all the best bacteria and fungi and protozoa and nematodes for you to go back and put all these organisms back into your soil. So it's not a difficult process. This is not going to cost you a massive amount of money. You don't have to be putting on massive amounts of compost. People always make the mistake where they try to calculate what's the nitrogen, what's the phosphorus, what's the sulfur present in the compost, as if the compost is a fertilizer. It's not. It's an inoculum of the organisms you need to put back into your soil. So if you're doing it right, you should only have to apply compost once. And then you maintain those organisms in your soil growing around the root systems of your plants. Decomposing the dead plant material at harvest. So that dead plant material decomposes within 1 month of that organic matter hitting the surface of your soil. So how long ago did you harvest? And do you still have detritus? Do you still have that organic matter sitting on the surface of your soil? Mother Nature is trying to send you a message. You do not have the biology in your soil. You're going to have diseases, you're going to have pests, you're going to have nutritional problems, you're not building structure, your root systems are unhappy, your plants are unhealthy. We need to look at these simple ways to tell whether you have the life you need or not. And if you don't, grow some compost. So, exudates coming out of those roots, feeding the bacteria, feeding the fungi, and only the beneficials will be fed. So now we have a massive amount of bacteria and fungi around the root system of that plant. Now these bacteria and fungi are going to do something more than just protect your roots from disease. Bacteria make a lot of glues. If we're talking about aerobic bacteria, and of course they have to be aerobic, they better not be anaerobic. The anaerobic organisms are the disease causers. They are the bad guys. The anaerobic organisms are going to drop the pH of your soil down below 5.5, and that is going to harm your plants. There is no way to get a soil pH below 5.5 as long as you maintain aerobic conditions. So here's a critical principle. If we're going to grow healthy plants, it has to be aerobic, because there's really nasty things happen. As soon as we go anaerobic, we're growing diseases, we're dropping the pH low, you're losing most of your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your sulfur as gases. Only under anaerobic conditions do we convert our soluble, inorganic forms of nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur into gases, and they leave your soil. How many of you can grow good plants if all your nitrogen, your soluble inorganic nitrogen, which is the only kind your plant takes up, what if it's all gone? It's left the system as a gas. How many plants are you going to grow? What is the yield going to be like if you've allowed your soil to become compacted? So we have to have the bacteria with the glues that they make build microaggregates in your soil. They pull those small-sized particles together and start to build a safe, protected place for them to live. Whereas that soil solution comes by, those bacteria are going to be grabbing the soluble, inorganic, everything out of that soil solution, and they hold and keep the nutrients in your soil. We should never have nutrients leaving our soil and ending up in our surface waters. You put an inorganic fertilizer out on your soil, what happens to 80% of that inorganic fertilizer once it's applied? Goodbye. It's leaving the system. It does not stay in your soil. Why do we have to keep putting on higher and higher, more and more amounts of inorganic fertilizer as time passes? Because we've destroyed more and more of the biology. There is no way for you to hold those nutrients in your soil. You are damaging everything downstream when you're using inorganic fertilizers. Oh, but that's the only way to grow plants. Oh, really? Gotta really question that particular point of view. And we're gonna go through those arguments here in just a few minutes after we finish this. So bacteria building microaggregates, building structure in your soil. We then have to have the fungi. Fungi grow as these long strands. And the fungi are going to take the microaggregates, the little particles made by the bacteria, and pull them all together into macroaggregates that you can see with your eyeballs. When you take your hand, put it in your soil, pick up that soil and give it a shake, you should be able to see the hallways and the passageways built by the fungi using the microaggregates that the bacteria made. And then water will move and infiltrate into your soil as deep as that structure has been built. In a normal soil, where we have normal sets of microorganisms, how far down into the soil does water infiltrate if you've got good, healthy soil as deep as you possibly can go? What's the depth? 16 miles. If a compaction zone has happened anywhere along the way, the water moving through is going to hang up at that interface. Water will not continue to move, and that water puddling at that depth is going to go downhill and take all your soil with it. So erosion is only a consequence of the damage that we've done to the life in the soil. Get that biology back into your soil, and you won't have those problems anymore. Hold and keep your nutrients where they belong, where they will become available to your plants in the future. So we want to be growing those bacteria and those fungi, building structure that you can see with your own eyes. If you want a little advance notice of whether you're going to have this structure built, get a little microscope. Costs you $350. Go to my website, order one. It comes with a camera. Take the online microscope course, and you learn how to use that microscope in 24 hours. Now you can start assessing your own soil, your own compost. It's not difficult, it's not hard, and you don't have to be sending those samples into the soil chemistry lab anymore. You look at your own biology. So great, structure, holding and building soil, retaining our nutrients. But you know what? There's a problem here. Because that set of nutrients tied up in the bacteria and fungi is not available to your plant. If you've got really good bacterial and fungal growth and that's all you've got in your soil, you're going to kill your plants. Because they are going to take up your nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, iron, zinc, all the different nutrients your plant requires. It's going to be held and retained in their biomass. So how did Mother Nature fix this problem? What did she do to put together normal nutrient cycling that happens in every ecosystem on this planet? Well, it's the next set of critters. Protozoa eat bacteria. And because the requirement for nitrogen concentration, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, the whole list, is way lower in protozoa biomass, when a protozoan eats any bacterial species, it releases nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, potassium, sodium, iron, zinc, boron, everything you want to talk about, in the proper balances for your plant, is going to be released. Where do most of the bacteria and soil grow? Right around your root zones. So when those bacteria are eaten by their predators, most of the nutrients are going to be released right in the root zone, and your plant says, thank you. That was very kind of you, Mr. Protozoa, to eat those bacteria that I grew with the exudates coming out of my root system. Isn't this amazing that Mother Nature figured this out, and that's how she cycles nutrients? It's so simple. Why do we have to make it so complex? Let me calculate for you exactly how much nitrate your plant is going to take up. Yeah, that's kind of esoteric and alchemic, isn't it? Listening to a fertilizer guy trying to explain that to you. Woo! When we're talking about fungi, immobilizing nutrients, fungi are eaten by fungal-feeding nematodes and by fungal-feeding microarthropods. Whenever one of these guys eats one of those guys, nutrients are released right at the surface of the root system. Your plant doesn't have to work at all. It's got all the nutrients it needs. So let's make certain we get these organisms back into your soil. If we're holding and retaining every nutrient you require in the bacteria and fungi, and then when the time is right, the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods eat the bacteria and the fungi and release the nutrients so that every second of every day that your plant is growing, It's going to get the balance of all the nutrients it requires. Talk about high nutrition plant material. We typically see increases from typical pasture grasses, maybe only 5 to 6% protein in pasture grass. And by getting this proper biology into the soil, we see increases up to 25 to 26% protein. Think that's going to grow a few better cows? Think you're going to be making a little more milk of higher quality? Human beings eating that food, we're getting the nutrition that we require. You don't need to be taking vitamins, supplements. What is wrong with people? That they think that supplements are the way to get healthy again. Food is medicine, and you need to be getting the nutrients that you require in the food that you eat. How do you make certain that those nutrients are going to be in your food? You must have the organisms in your soil. So hopefully now you've got a really good idea why you need bacteria and fungi, why you need protozoa and nematodes, the fungal and the bacterial feeders, why you need microarthropods. Would it be possible that you can get too many of these organisms and they overeat your bacteria and fungi? Absolutely. You get too many predators, now how are you going to fix this? Well, how did Mother Nature fix it? Go look and see how nature figured out this conundrum. Well, yeah, it's the next set of predators in the system. How do you keep these guys in balance? You got to have somebody else that eats them and keeps them in the proper balance so the nutrient cycling can go. So we've got to have predatory nematodes. We have to have macroarthropods, the bigger guys that eat this trophic level. Well, and then how do you keep these guys in balance? Then you got to have birds, you've got to have earthworms, you've got to have spiders, you have to have voles and shrews and mice, and who is the top of this food web? We are. We are the gardeners of this planet. That is our charge as human beings. It's not to extract, it's not to destroy. It's to maintain natural interactions so that we don't destroy our society. We have to go back to this. We have no choice. If human beings are going to remain on this planet, we have to stop destroying it. So if we want to stick around, we better pay attention and shift to this. It is completely sustainable. It doesn't cost the grower anything more than planting seeds in the springtime and then going out at harvest and harvesting the yield. Pests, diseases, lack of fertility doesn't exist if you get the biology correct in your soil. You don't have to work that much. So put back into your soil your willing organic workers so you don't have to work so hard. If you're out there working really hard and having to work and get rid of the weeds and hoeing and pulling and squishing pest bodies on the leaves of your plants, take a note. Mother Nature's trying to send you a message. Please learn how to read this so that you don't have to be doing that work anymore. Put these guys back to work for you, both in the root system and above ground. Top part of your plant is really not that different from the root system of your plant. So get the biology back into the system. Because remember, Mother Nature doesn't need human beings, but we need Mother Nature. It's a one-way street. She can do perfectly fine without human beings on this planet. I mean, after all, think of dinosaurs. They must have annoyed Mother Nature a lot. And look at what happened. So a summary of all these benefits that are obtainable by getting the proper biology back into the soil. So suppressing disease, the right bacteria and fungi in the proper balances, and we'll talk about those balances in a minute. So you don't have to use pesticides. When we're going to work with you one-on-one to figure out what are your problem organisms, what are the difficulties you have, is it pests, is it diseases, is it weeds, is it a lack of fertility, is it puddling on the surface of your soil, is it compaction? We're going to come up with specific recommendations, exactly what you need to do to shift your soil in the right direction. There are laboratories, so Food Web has laboratories around the world where you can send samples, but I would much prefer for you to learn how to assay your own soil. It takes one day for you to learn how to use that microscope and identify these organisms so you know what's going on and you can immediately work to fix things. We retain nutrients, so we're not going to have runoff, we're not going to have leaching, we're not going to have erosion. We deal with slopes that are more than 50% slopes. And that slope may already be shifting, starting to go down the hill. We come in with the right biology and we shut it down within 24 hours. Erosion is something you should not have to deal with. How are you going to prevent that slope from failing? You must have life. And ultimately, you've got to get the plants back into the system. So retaining nutrients. Making nutrients available at the rate your plant requires. Who's in control of the rate at which those nutrients are released in a plant available form right there at the surface of the root system of the plant? Hopefully you can answer that. It's your plant. How much nutrient does your plant require? It's going to put out enough exudate to grow the bacteria and fungi so they can be eaten by the protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods to release the nutrients that your plant requires. How fast between that exudate being released from the root system and the plant gets back the nutrient that it requires. Work at the Duke Phytotron in the United States shows that it takes about 3 seconds. Immediate response time if you have the biology in your soil. What if you've been killing your biology? What if you've been tilling too much? What if you've been slicing and dicing and crushing and destroying these organisms? What if you've been putting out toxic chemicals that kill those things? Okay, you're going to have problems. You have to use pesticides. You have to use inorganic fertilizers, and you're harming everything downstream. Why don't we use that? To stop people using those toxic chemicals on their property, because if you're downstream from them, you're suffering, and you're going to have to work. Let's get a lawyer that will start putting together some court cases so that we can go after people who are destroying the biology in your soil. We will decompose toxins, we build soil structure. Now, let's talk a little bit more about that nutrient retention. This is something that's been discovered in just the last couple of years. We always have considered that when we harvest plants from your agricultural field, when your cows come out and graze that pasture, we're removing nutrients from the soil in that plant material. So when you go sell a tomato, you've removed some of the nutrients from your soil. So you have to come back in with nutrients of some kind and replenish those nutrients in your soil. Is that actually true? No, it's not. Because you have an infinity supply of nutrients that every second of every day is replenishing nutrients in your soil. Think about it. Where's that coming from? When you go to any introductory soil science textbook, you go to any geomorphology textbook, you go to any agronomist textbook, I mean, this is the introduction. It's usually in the first 10 pages of these books. What you find is a table that I copied from one of the books, so Sparks in 2003, and they can show you that the average concentration of any nutrient is massively greater than your plant could use in the next 100 years. Those nutrients are already present in your soil. They're in your rocks, they're in your sands, your silts, your clays, your pebbles. The bedrock of every second of every day is being broken down by microorganisms into sand, silt, and clay. This is replenished. Until the day you run out of rocks, there is absolutely no reason to put an inorganic fertilizer out. There is no reason to put manure in your field. Now, organic matter. Yeah, take that manure and turn it into compost and use that organic matter, or grow plants so that that organic matter is being replenished all the time. But the data are there that says there is no nutrient lacking in your soil, and this is replenished every second of every day. Why are we putting out more fertilizers? How many of you get told that you have to put lime in your soil? Whoa, I mean, that's like, what's underlying your soil in Britain? Yeah, all that wonderful chalk. Think there's a little calcium in there? How do we make that calcium available? Oh, there's the problem. These nutrients are not in a plant available form. They're in the total pool. When you send a sample into a soil chemistry lab, how much do they tell you about this total pool of nutrients that are actually present in your soil? There is not one bit of information in a soil chemistry test telling you that you've got massive amounts of nitrogen. Take a look, find nitrogen. You have 2,000 parts per million, micrograms per gram of your soil. How much does a plant require of nitrogen? It has like 3 parts per million. So think of how many years worth of plant growth you've got sitting there waiting. But how do you get these nutrients that are present in every grain of sand, every bit of silt, every clay particle? How do you get those nutrients from these plant not available forms into a plant available form? But I do want to emphasize to you, there is no soil on this planet that lacks the nutrients to grow plants for the next 10,000 billion years. Why are we putting out inorganic fertilizers? Because we've destroyed the mechanism to take the nutrients that are present in your soil and convert them into the plant available form. And guess what? I think you could probably answer this. Who is it that does this work for you? It's microorganisms. So there's that total pool. I just showed you the chart of those values for each of those different nutrients. Let me go back to that previous chart. This is the average. When we go over all soils everywhere on the planet, this is the average. There's your range. There is nothing that is present in zero concentration. I don't care where you go. This includes the desert soils in Saudi Arabia. This includes deserts in Mongolia and the United States and any place else you want to go. This is tundra. This includes every single soil on the planet. Nothing lacks the nutrients to grow plants. What we lack ever since we started doing agriculture that damages the life in the soil, that's what's caused the problem. Get the organisms back, and you don't have this problem anymore. There's the total pool. And because the bacteria and fungi make the acids, they make the enzymes to solubilize those nutrients from the crystalline structure of the rock, the sand, the silt, the clay. They pull those nutrients and hold them in their bodies. They don't leach. They will not be lost. And then when they are eaten by protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, earthworms, spiders, those sorts of things, then they release those nutrients in a plant-available form. When you think about the fact that that soluble pool is less than 1% of the total nutrients that are actually present in your soil, you can see where you could be led astray if the only thing you're told about are the soluble nutrients present in your soil. When you send that sample of soil into the soil chemistry lab, what are they going to tell you about? Only the soluble pool. Can they scare you? Can they make you feel like, oh my God, I better run out there and I better buy tons worth of this or that, or phosphorus or nitrogen or sulfur or magnesium or boron or whatever it is that this soluble test indicates is lacking. You better go out and buy inorganic fertilizers and pour that on your soil, because otherwise you're not going to be able to grow the plant and you're going to fail. You're not going to have the money. You're going to lose your farm. You're going to, terror strikes your heart, doesn't it? When they do that to you. And when you realize just how ridiculous that is. Those people are trying to get you to buy something from them that you don't need. Complete and total lies. And as long as you understand that the reason we've been put into that chemical trap is because we destroyed the biology in the soil. The only reason the green revolution works is because the life has already been destroyed. They're not growing on soil, they're growing on dirt. Let's turn that dirt back into soil. So let's go through this a little bit. Let's hammer it a little bit more so I'm really absolutely sure that you understand this. Total nutrients, what's actually present, that chart that I showed you, total nutrients are not reported on your soil chemistry report. You learn nothing about this when you do a soil chemistry. The exchangeable pool, and when you go to a soil chemistry report, the only thing that is reporting exchangeable nutrients is base saturation. So calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, as if 4 nutrients is all you need to know about in your soil. How many nutrients does your plant require? And when I was a kid, when I was a munchkin, those 60 years ago, when I was a little kid, what were the essential nutrients back then? N, P, K. That's all you need to grow a plant, right? Right. So it wasn't too many years after that, by the time I got into grade school, how many essential nutrients? Well, then we had 6. They discovered apparently that we needed a few more things, like calcium, like iron. By the time I was in high school, it was up to 12 essential nutrients. By the time I was in college, it was 24 essential nutrients. By the time I got to graduate school, and then it was 28 essential nutrients. Today, most plant physiologists would probably cough up 42 essential nutrients. Really? Is that the limit? How important is arsenic in the diet of your plant? Does your plant require arsenic in order to be alive? Yes, it does. Because if you don't have any arsenic, your plant is just going to be a blob of liquidy stuff on the surface of the soil. How about you? Do you need arsenic? Most people think, ooh, arsenic, it's a poison, it'll kill me. Well, too much arsenic will kill you. But if you don't have enough arsenic, yeah, you can't move, your nerves don't function. So is arsenic an essential nutrient? I sort of think it probably is, but you will never find it anywhere in anybody's list of essential nutrients. So do we have more to learn? We have not yet reached maximum. So, exchangeable nutrients, they only tell you about 4 of them. Exchangeable means those nutrients that are tied up on the surface of the sands, the silts, the clay, the organic matter, and the organisms. Get more organisms in your soil and you will hold more exchangeable nutrients in your soil. Increase the amount of organic matter, you will hold more exchangeable nutrients in your soil. You will flocculate your clays instantly. Okay, but when we're looking at plant nutrition, what we need to know about is soluble nutrients. But we don't want a lot of this. We want just the right amount for your plant to take up every second of every day, all during the time it's growing. It needs to be taking up all of the nutrients, not just nitrogen or phosphorus or sulfur or boron or zinc or whatever. It's got to take all of them up in a balanced fashion. How did Mother Nature figure that one out? It's by having bacteria and fungi being eaten by protozoa, nematodes, and microarthropods. We need to make certain that the proper balance of these organisms are present in our soil, and then forget about the inorganic fertilizers. Forget about pouring manure on your soil. A little bit of compost. Half a ton of compost every couple, 3 to 5 years. That's maybe if you need it, that's what you should be thinking about. Will that reduce your workload? Just a little. So those soluble nutrients, We need them in small concentrations. Instead of putting the whole growing season's wham set of nutrients on the soil at the beginning of the growing season, and of course 80% of those leach. They're gone, they damage everything downstream. So really, when you think about this, sending a sample of soil into a soil chemistry lab makes no sense. That's not the important information. The important information is what's your biology? Do you have the organisms to tie up your nutrients? Do you have the organisms that will then release those nutrients right in the root zone and not away from the root where your plant doesn't need it? If you really want to monitor nutrients, what you need to be monitoring is your plant tissue. So a plant tissue test will tell you what your plant is actually getting. So you can go into the scientific literature, you can look at the studies that have been done in the scientific literature, comparing soluble nutrients present in the soil with what's actually in your plant. At any point in time, what's the relation between the plant tissue nutrient concentrations and the soluble nutrient concentration in your soil? There is no relationship at all. Period. Full stop. No argument. Go read the scientific literature. Somebody wants to say, oh, no, you've got to have all this soluble nitrogen because you're going to grow a better plant. So you put inorganic fertilizers out there, and if you have the proper biology in the soil, it makes no difference whatsoever. What if you don't have good nitrogen? What if you don't have good biology in your soil? Okay, then you put an inorganic fertilizer out there, and yes, there is a plant response. So see, if you use an inorganic fertilizer, you go out and put manure on your soil, and you see a plant response, your message that your brain ought to receive is, you don't have biology in your soil, and you better fix that. Or you're going to have to keep putting on all these amendments. You've got to, this week you're going to have to go and buy some of this and put on this set of inorganic fertilizers. And then next week you're going to have to go and buy some more and put that on. The next couple of weeks, you're going to have to go buy some more and put that out. And can you see what's going on in the world of conventional ag? Who's making money? Because all the time you're going out and you're buying more and you're putting it on, and then you got to go buy some more. And then you got to put more on and more on and more on. Isn't that a definition of a moron farmer? Use that one on your fertilizer salesman. Because you don't need it. And the way you can prove it is what's in your plant tissue. I can take you to any forest system, and I can show you that the phosphorus concentration in that forest is 0.0001 parts per million. But you look in the plant tissue and there is excess phosphate present in the plant tissue of the plant. This is meaningless. What we need to know, has your plant taken up the nutrition that it requires? And your plant is doing that every second of every day. All we have to do is make sure that nutrient cycling process is occurring. How many of you have seen this chart? Fertilizer salesmen love this. Agronomists love this because they use this as the excuse for why you got to go buy more of something you don't need. Throw all of this out the window because this is based strictly on pH. And when you start looking at when these different nutrients are most available, it's all over the board. The only thing that's actually most available at a pH is 6.5, the preferred pH for all plants to grow. Like, what on this planet would lead you to believe that nature behaves that way? All plants grow best at a pH of 6.5. What? What's the pH range that all plants can grow over? Between 5.5 and 11. The highest producing alfalfa fields, or what do you call it, lucerne fields, in the state of Nevada in the United States grow in soils that have a pH of 11. Beats everybody else in the state. But when you look at the root systems of the plants, the pH is 7.0. Because right around the root system, the plant is controlling the pH to what the plant requires. And so the plant's going to be doing these changes. I love it when we take, a whole bunch of samples from your field, mix them all together, throw that into water, and stick a couple of pH probes in there, and we come up with the fact that your soil has a pH of 6.5. Really? Go to your root system and do a little site testing. Over here in your root system, the pH is 11. But over here, it's 5.5, and here it's 6.2, and there it's 7.8, and over here it's 8.1, and over here it's 9.2, and every micrometer length of your root system, the pH changes. So what's the actual pH in your soil? Everything. It depends on what your plant requires. Put your plant back to work. Let it do what it's supposed to be doing. Throw this chart out the window. So when we look at soil versus dirt, it's only soil if we have the organisms to build the structure. And that means rainfall, as it moves into that soil, is going to move through that soil at a reasonable rate. All of the nutrients are going to be held by the bacteria and fungi. So as that soil solution goes on by, those microorganisms are sucking up all of that soluble nutrient. So the nutrients are going to be held. As water moves through that soil, it is completely cleaned up. You can safely drink any water coming out of the bottom of actual soil. It's clean, it's healthy, you don't have to worry about it. But what if we don't have the organisms? That water moving through that soil, well, typically it's going to hang up somewhere at a compaction layer because there's nothing building structure. And so that water hangs up, and then it's going to go sideways down the hill, taking all of your dirt with it. Your sand, your silts, your clays. If any water comes out of the bottom, it's going to be toxic. Nothing to take up those nutrients, nothing to retain. It's going to cause damage to everything downstream. So the simple answer for all of you is if you don't have all of the benefits we've been talking about, get some compost and get this biology back into your soil. If you don't like to grow compost, then you can buy an inoculum of these organisms, but it's way less expensive for you to make a ton of compost a year and get that biology back out into your soil. Now I have pictures of some of the organisms just to let you see how easy it is to do identifications. All of these pictures are basically going to be where we've gone out into the soil and we've taken lots of little samples from the top 3 inches, the top 5 centimeters of the soil, mix them together in a plastic bag. We've measured out 1 gram, mixed 4 grams of water. Please make sure that it's not toxic water, and typically the water coming out of your taps is extremely toxic to organisms. And you're drinking that. And you need microorganisms in your digestive system. Okay, different topic. Whole several lectures there. But we want to make certain that we treat that water with humic acid before we use it. So we tie up all those toxic materials that are in your water. Suck them up, put them onto the surfaces of that humic acid so it won't kill your organisms. Shake that 1 to 5 dilution, take a drop of that out, put it on your microscope slide, stick a cover slip on it, and start looking through your microscope. And when you see critters that look like this, that's a nematode. And now we got to look at their mouth and say, look at that. No spears, no teeth, just a nice, simple mouth. It's a bacterial feeder. It's not that difficult. You can learn to do these identifications in the course of a day, typically. Well, and then you need to practice, yeah. Get comfortable doing this. But our bacterial feeding nematodes, are they good guys or are they bad guys? They're good guys. They allow you to stop having to put toxic chemicals on your soil. They help your root systems a lot. When we look at another sample like this, it's like, are there any bad guys in this picture? Oh yeah, there's some pretty nasty guys in here. But how do you identify them? So you got to learn that. So, here's a root, for example. We got lots of little bacteria. Some of them are a little out of focus. You can see where they're round. They're cocci. You didn't know you were here for a lesson in Latin, did you? Cocci just means they're round. So we've got these round bacteria. Some of them are pretty big. Some of them are much smaller. We've got rod-shaped bacteria. Here's a micro-aggregate. These bacteria are gluing the sands, the silts, the clays, the organic matter together. So we have a massive number of bacteria, mostly rod-shaped bacteria in this aggregate. And you can see the nice dark brown color, that's humic acid. The honey color, that's fulvic acid. So do we have some good organic materials? Yeah. In the past, this has been a really good soil. But there's some things in this picture that tell me we got problems now. Something's happened, and our plants are dying. Or they are very certain. They are going to be showing symptoms very soon. Advanced warning when you start looking at the biology in your soil. So we've got some good organic matter, lots of aggregates. We've got macro aggregates, micro aggregates. But when you look at that root, you can see all the cells inside that root. And roots should be uniform diameter pretty much all the way along. But you'll notice as you're going along that root, all of a sudden we got this great big bite taken out of that root system. Right there, your heart should start sinking. Oh no, we've got disease-causing organisms going in here. Our soil is no longer aerobic. It can't be a place where we've got aerobic conditions. If the anaerobic disease-causing fungi are attacking your root system, right there, you can see we got a problem. What do you have to do to fix this problem? Rebuild structure. So the disease-causing organism can no longer grow and attack and destroy your plant. Here's another indicator of anaerobic conditions. This is a protozoan. It's the bad guy protozoa. It's a ciliate. How do you tell a ciliate from anything else? Ciliates have cilia. They're pretty silly. All these nice little hairs, more than two, we're looking at a ciliate. It only wins in competition with the good guy protozoa when oxygen concentration in your soil drops lower than 6 parts per million. You are going anaerobic. You start seeing ciliates. Again, the message to you is that you don't have the proper life. You're going to have to fix this problem. You've got to get oxygen back into your soil. You've got a compaction layer. Go fix it. Inject the organisms to that compaction layer. Let them rebuild it. How long does it take these organisms to rebuild? Well, if you're treating them right, it takes them about 3 days. So we can go from a place where you're about to lose your crop, and 3 days later, your plants are recovering, they're regaining health, and you can continue on to a place where you don't have the damage. So learning what these organisms look like, what's present, what do you have to fix? These are fungi. So when we're looking at fungal hyphae, again, uniform diameter all the way along. The better fungi are wider diameter. So anything bigger than 3 micrometers. So nice, thick, wide fungal hyphae, good guys. Colored fungi are pretty much always better. The bad guy fungi, can you find the disease-causing fungi in this picture? Well, what are its characteristics? Clear, colorless, and very narrow diameter. The disease-causing fungus here happens to be a little bit out of focus because I was taking a picture of that guy, the good guy. But you can see that disease-causing fungus right there. That is Pythium. It attacks root systems. It's a white rot fungus. And almost any of our vegetables, any of our row crops will suffer damage if Pythium gets growing in their root system. How do you prevent that Pythium from causing a problem? You have to have the good guy fungi. When we take this soil and we plant anything in it, we never see any disease problems in the root system because the beneficial fungi prevent that from happening. Apply a fungicide to this soil and you are going to have disease. because the Pythium is already resistant to the fungicides that we have. So how do you deal with diseases and pests? You put the proper biology in here to deal with that problem. The last thing I want to talk about, oh good, and I have plenty of time to do it. So I hope I haven't spoken too rapidly for any of you. I know I can get going. I can start throwing bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, mycorrhizal fungi, and woohoo! Yeah, and so you can't become a soil consultant until you can say all of those organisms that fast. So, trying to understand how we set the stage in our soils. What is the balance of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes that we need to have in our soils for different kinds of plants to grow? And here's where we've got to go back to the concept of succession. I'm sure most of you realize that with enough disturbance, we're going to be back to bare soil where nothing's growing. And if that disturbance is toxic enough, if it's horrible enough, it may be years before anything starts to grow because we have so decimated the organisms in that soil. So at that stage of succession, the earliest, well, it's what everything on this planet used to be. Once upon a time, there was no life on this planet. Everything had to be built by biology. So in that condition, the first thing that comes into that system is going to be bacteria. They're easily spread, they're carried by lots of other things, by the wind. And so very early in succession, we're looking at 10 micrograms of bacteria, absolutely no fungi to be found. So evolution works this way, as does succession. Over time, because we're starting to grow weeds, so we have set the stage for the weedy species that only require bacteria and bacterial predators. Nitrate is the predominant form of nitrogen here because it is the bacterial way of life to convert all of our soluble inorganic nitrogen into nitrate. And so weeds, if you think about your property, and if you do absolutely nothing between now and a year from now, you did absolutely nothing on any of your property, what would grow? And if your answer is weeds, you already know what your food web is. There you are. If what comes up, if you leave your property alone, if what comes up are a massive number of different kinds of weeds, this is your food web, and you need to fix it if you want to have healthy production of any other kind of plant. So through natural succession, because we do have weeds growing here, there's a little bit of fungal food being made by those plants. Not a lot. It's almost all bacterial food. So you see where we're not going to be moving really fast from the weed stage of succession, but eventually, give it enough time. You know, Mother Nature says, like, stop being in such a hurry. There's plenty of time, you know. So what, it takes 100 years, 1,000 years. We'll get there. Stop being so pushy. Now, from a human point of view, we're like, get the weeds out of here. So how do you do that? Get in a compost that has lots of good fungi in it and start shifting that ratio to where now we have at least a little bit of fungi, and we're going to set the stage to grow our early successional plant species like the brassicas, the cole and the kale crops, the riparian plants, asparagus. They need that ratio of fungi to bacteria here. These are not mycorrhizal plants. It harms them to be colonized by mycorrhizal fungi. So great, if that's what you're trying to grow, now you know what that ratio is that you need to get into your soil. But now Mother Nature, you know, more food, more fungal foods coming into the soil. So as we move into the vegetable, you know, and now we're growing potatoes and tomatoes, the Solanaceae, we're growing carrots, we're growing celery. Some of those vegetables, they require more fungi. Yeah, more bacteria too. Nutrient cycling has to get up and get going here. But that ratio of fungi to bacteria, we're setting the stage for all of our vegetable crops. More fungal foods coming into the soil. We're going to keep enhancing, or nature keeps enhancing that fungal biomass in the soil, and pretty soon, balanced ratio of fungi and bacteria, you're going to be growing highly productive pasture species. This is where those plants that are most productive, that maintain the health of your animals, that have all the nutrients for your animals, and what you discover is always scary for pasture people when they come out and they look and they go, the cows have only eaten a quarter of the food they ought to be eating. Oh no, they're going to be unhealthy and they're going to be sick. No, no, no. It only takes a quarter of the food when every mouthful that you're taking has 5 times more protein in it. Think about yourself. If everything that you ate contained maximum nutrition, would you eat less? Absolutely. So when we are organic from the heart, not through substitution, we're doing the real proper biological job, you eat less. Because you're getting all the nutrition, your body is satisfied, your body's not saying, I'm hungry, feed me. So it applies to humans as well as animals. As we move through this successional process, everything gets healthier and healthier. We are shifting from these species to those. Now keep going. All that good fungal food going into the soil, we're going to keep increasing fungal biomass. And now we've gone over the edge into a fungal-dominated system. And we're going to shift from our row crops, from our good grasses, into vines, shrubs, eventually then into deciduous forests, and eventually into old growth. When we're looking at that fungal to bacterial biomass ratio in a true old growth forest, when we go to the Olympic Peninsula in the United States, the most productive forest system on the planet, it beats even tropical rainforests. That fungal biomass is 70,000 micrograms of fungal biomass per gram of soil. If you look at a gram of forest soil from that part of the world, 80% of the weight of that soil is biology. Talk to an agronomist and they will tell you, oh no, biology is never more than 5% of the weight of a gram of soil. Well, it's because your agronomist only works with soils that are right here. They're at the weed stage of life. If they would look at later successional systems, they would have a very different attitude. But of course, what are the systems that they're working with all the time? Yeah, it's this stage, where we are setting the conditions in the soil to grow weeds, maintain the diseases, maintain the problem organisms. Don't retain your nutrients or your water. So as we're going through succession, we get an idea of what's the proper balance of fungi to bacteria. So can we take this information and kind of look at it from a different point of view? What is the fungal to bacterial biomass ratio that you need to have in your soil to set the stage to grow whatever plant you want to grow? Let's say you want to grow strawberries. Where does strawberry occur on this successional sequence? Where do you find strawberries in the natural world? They're understory plants in forests. So if you're trying to grow strawberries that are healthy, that don't need pesticides, don't need inorganic fertilizers, weeds are not going to be growing, no pests, no problems, no need to do rotation. What is that ratio of fungi to bacteria? Bingo, right here. It needs to be fungal dominated because that's how nature has selected for that plant. You set the stage to grow strawberries. Okay, so what's another plant that you'd like to grow? You want to grow tomatoes? What's the fungal to bacterial biomass ratio so that you can grow tomatoes where weeds are not going to be a problem? Diseases, pests, all of that. Where do tomatoes occur in the real world? Well, where did tomatoes come from? See, most people don't know this, which is kind of like amazing to me. You've been growing this for Where did tomatoes come from? They're from the New World, right? They're from like Ecuador, Peru, up into the lower parts of the United States. So they are plants that grow right in this stage. So there's that fungal to bacterial biomass ratio that you need to grow good tomatoes. Still bacterial dominated because tomatoes need more nitrate than ammonium. But as we get up in this end and we go fungal dominated, nitrate is not the predominant form of nitrogen anymore. Work done by the CEDICs in France and work done at Utah State University by John Stout back in 1995 published papers that showed forest systems must have mostly ammonium. If you have any nitrate at all in these kinds of systems in your orchards, in your woodlots, if you're trying to grow trees and shrubs, if you've got more nitrate than ammonium, you are causing disease. You are setting the stage to grow the disease-causing fungi. You are suppressing the mycorrhizal. So we have to get that soil fungal dominated. So ammonium is the predominant form of nitrogen. Early in succession, yes, bacterial and nitrate. If what you want to grow are dandelions, great, get all kinds of nitrate in that soil. So why would fertilizer salesmen be telling you that you've got to put nitrate out into your orchard system, or out into your row crops, or out into your pasture? Ooh, you better get more soluble nitrogen out there. You need more nitrate. Because they want you to buy something else from them. If you use the nitrate out there on any system other than weeds, if you're putting nitrate fertilizers out anywhere else in succession, you're causing a problem. And that means you're going to have to come back and buy pesticides. And you're going to have to come back and buy more inorganic fertilizers. And you're going to have to buy herbicides. And you're going to have to buy, and well, we're right back to the moron farmer, aren't we? So we've got to get this information out to everybody on the planet. We need to get this understanding of what soil is really about. Where is the plant that you want to grow on that successional process? Anybody have a plant in mind that I could kind of help you out on that?
Rice.
Rice. So where does rice belong? Rice is a riparian plant. So rice, when it's in the, well, I'm talking about wetland rice now, okay, not dry land. So I'm making an assumption. If we're talking about wetland rice, you probably need to be growing at that ratio right there. Let's go back to that previous picture that's maybe a little easier to understand. Wetland rice would be here, especially when you're during the wet part where the soil is flooded. You want a lot of azolla. You want a lot of nitrogen-fixing algae and nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the root systems. But as you allow that soil to drain down, when you're going to harvest your rice, you better make sure that that rice is now moved from the riparian system into row crop, into our typical grass system. So one of the important things with rice is that you allow that biology to come back much more fungal as the soil dries. Now, if we're in dryland rice, terrestrial rice, right from the very beginning, you better start there. And you better make certain that you have some understory plants in that rice field that's going to fix nitrogen. And you want a permanent understory set of plants that are constantly going to be fixing nitrogen. So when you plant your rice in there, at this ratio of fungi to bacteria, every second of every day while that rice is growing, we're going to be making certain it's as healthy and as productive as it possibly can. When we've worked with people in Thailand, when we've worked in Southeast Asia with folks, we increase yields in the rice fields by 150%. How many of you would like to increase your yields as compared to the conventional system? I drive the USDA in North and South Dakota crazy. because our growers always come in with the highest yields. They always win all the bonuses for their wheat, for their soybean, and for their corn. And they just can't understand how this could be. Well, I can tell them, and I routinely tell them, but there's a disconnect, there's a mental barrier they cannot understand. Well, oh well, you just kind of have to not worry about them, because we're shifting most of the growers over to a biological point of view. How about another? Potatoes. So typically the potatoes are going to be right in here. So slightly on the bacterial side. Let me go back. So our potatoes right in between these two. So I'm sorry. Maybe I can, so does that work better? Okay. So potatoes ought to be like right in here. So our bacteria may be 500 parts per million, and then our fungi ought to be up around 400. And so that's really going to set the stage to grow your potatoes. No weeds, no pests, no diseases. Maximum yields. We've done some work in Oregon with that, and we always increase yields about 100 to 120% increases in yields. We have no root-feeding nematodes. We have no fungal diseases on the potatoes. So take a look on the Soil Food Web website. And a lot of the data for this kind of information is on that site. So if you think about this, you know, Mother Nature is driving succession towards that old growth forest. So why isn't everything on this planet an old growth forest? Because disturbance happens. Floods, fires, odd weather patterns. Have you had some of those here in Britain recently? So disturbance is going to drive us backwards in succession. So think about a flood that happens late in the growing season where the bacteria and fungi are growing very, very rapidly. And so those organisms start using up all the oxygen in that soil. You're going to be driving your soil back to really early stages of succession. And then Mother Nature starts to rebuild. And then along comes a herd of cattle, and they start compacting. And then Mother Nature starts to rebuild. And then a fire happens, and then she rebuilds. And then ta-da, ta-da. It's like the yin and yang of ecosystems. How many times has your soil been back in a place where really what you're setting the stage to grow is weeds? How much have you built? And then when's the disturbance? Think about what the damage the tillage does. When you till soil, you're going to slice and dice and crush mostly your fungi, a lot of your protozoa, all your good guy nematodes, your microarthropods. You disturb that soil and they're all running away. And so once they've left, you're back here at the early stages of succession. And you're suffering diseases and pests and weeds, so you want to, as rapidly as possible, get it back to where that you've ameliorated the effect of those disturbances. So I'm going the wrong direction. Compaction, can you see the compaction layer in that soil? I think it's kind of hard in here. But notice in this agricultural field, we're talking about wheat or barley or oats. The compaction layer is at the depth that the tillage equipment is going down to. The pressure from the plow itself pressing on the soil is causing compaction. As water moves through that soil, it's going to puddle at that compaction layer. Water will not move from soil of one density, we fluffed it with the plow, into soil of a different density. The water hangs up, it goes anaerobic here. You're starting the plow pan. Because as your roots then grow down and they hit that anaerobic zone, the anaerobic conditions will kill them. So your root system is now confined into that small depth of your soil. You've basically put your root system into a coffin. How well would you grow in a coffin? And so neither do your roots. So agricultural fields, and then think about when we're dealing with urban, suburban, landscape kinds of things. Exactly the same thing has happened. So here's from somebody's backyard in Boston. They wanted to put in a barbecue pit, and so they dug down into the soil. Can you tell me where the compaction layer is in this soil? The root systems of all these plants are confined in the top 3 feet of the soil. They hit that compaction zone. Can you see that black? Ooh, and the smell coming out of here was like, whoa, who's got the cesspit in their backyard? Anaerobic is all get out. It's killing all the roots. And so most of the roots from this tree are fighting with the roots from that shrub and with the grass. Nothing is doing well. Oh no, the tree's perfectly healthy. It's green, it's growing. Yeah, that explains the scale. That explains the caterpillars. That explains the fact that whole massive parts of that tree are dead. No leaves growing at all. Right, healthy tree. How do you fix this problem? Get your organisms down to that compaction layer. You may have to inject them. Have to get them deposited down into that area so it rebuilds soil structure so the root systems of your tree can go down as deep as they ought to go. How far down can root systems of plants go? What's the maximum depth? You've been told root systems of your veggies only go a couple inches, your trees only go 3 feet, your vines only go 3 feet. Excuse me? They apparently have no idea how plants grow. This is a grass plant. This is ryegrass from most people's lawn. This is work I did with Hendrikus Schraven. This is Hendrikus. He's 6.5 feet tall. And he is holding the grass plant that is only 3 months old. And that root system on that grass goes 4.5 feet into the soil at 3 months. We were mowing that grass, so we mowed the grass several times. 3 days before we dug this plant out of the soil, so we had a PVC pipe that we pounded into the soil, and then we pulled it up using, a big winch, cut the PVC pipe off, washed that soil, that column gently, and you can see the roots from that single seed of grass after 3 months. How far down does the grass in your lawn go? It ought to be like this in 3 months. Go and take a look at your pasture. If the root system of your pasture grasses are only going down 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch, what's your take-home message? It's not soil. You don't have life. Fix it. Because if your root system is going down this deep, do you have to worry 1 iota about the nutrition that your plant's getting? About the water that your plant's getting? You don't have to water anything at all, even through the driest summer. We've worked in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai, in many places throughout the Mideast, in the desert systems in North America, in Mongolia, and we are showing that if we get the proper biology in the soil, we can bring life, we can grow plants at maximum productivity anywhere. Okay, maybe not the North Pole, but anywhere where we've got the climate to allow plants to grow, we can fix these problems. If you've ever been told you've got really bad soil, so poor, your soil's so poor that you cannot possibly grow row crops or good pastures, it's complete and total, excuse the French here, bullshit. Because we can too. I have quite often taken USDA Extension Service agents out to a farm that I've started to work on and asked them to tell me what is the soil, what is the sand, silt, clay fractions in this soil. They'll look at it, oh, this is pure clay. You can't grow anything. Best you could grow here would be Bermuda grass. Good luck keeping your animals alive on Bermuda grass because no nutrients. It's an early successional grass species. So I just thank them. I've got the documentation. They have written the report that says the only grass that's going to be able to grow here is Bermuda grass because all you've got is clay. So we proceed out there and put on a couple tons of good compost with the proper biology.
plant our big and little blue stem, the highly productive grasses in that part of the world, the Indian grass, the eastern grama and the blue grama grasses. Get a gorgeous crop of grass growing. Invite the USDA Extension Service guy back out to the field, and he looks at that soil and says, "Ah, this is the most lovely loam soil I've ever seen in my whole life." And I laugh, because the only mineral particle that's in that soil is clay. And within just a couple weeks, we've converted it from clay that is completely and totally compacted. You cannot drive a stake into that soil because of the compaction of the clay. And within just a few short weeks, rebuilt the structure with the proper biology in that organic matter, and brought the growth of reseeded and brought the growth of those grasses right back up to where you want to be, to the point that after that growing season, the Extension Service guy comes in and says, "Fantastic loam. What did you do?" No, take a sample of this soil. Tell me what the mineral particles are in this soil. This is clay and nothing but clay. But we've put the organic matter and the organisms back into the system, and we're keeping our herd alive on very little pasturage, because you don't need it if you've got the biology back in the soil. And they're always amazed. They're always like, "Oh, it can't be. This is not the same soil that you showed me, 6 months ago." And I've been accused of going out and digging up all of the clay and taking it somewhere and replacing it with sand, silt, and clay, 30% sand, 30% silt, 30% clay. And I just was like, right, I've got that kind of money to be doing that. So hopefully getting the principles across to you that will allow you to start thinking of ways to get this biology back into the soil. And I've got lots of examples, but I'm going to have to reserve those examples for Thursday and Friday. I hope that you will come join us on Thursday and Friday to hear more information. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
We have a few minutes if anyone would like to ask questions. Ben will have... Ben? Get a microphone there.
So questions, they'll come out. I talked fast.
Hi there. Can I ask a question about our winters, please? It's about our winters, establishing a crop over winter. So a crop's a few weeks old, and then nothing happens. Thank you.
Okay, so in the instance where you've seeded in the fall or early winter period, and normally those seeds would be able to germinate and grow in the fall, but nothing's coming up. The approach to take would be to go out and take soil samples and send those soil samples into Laverstock Park, which is where the SFI lab here in England is at, and ask them to do an assessment of the biology in that soil. Can I ask that people in the back, I'm running out of voice because I have to, no, I haven't finished the last question because I'm having problems. So I would usually want to talk with you about what's the response. Do you have weeds coming up instead of your crop? Let's go with a metal rod and try and find where you've got the compaction layer in that soil so we know where to get the biology down to. I would probably want you to start making compost with really good biology in it, and in just a few short weeks we can make that compost and start getting it out on your soils, especially here where you don't have freezing weather. The only time you can't put biology out is when the ground's actually frozen. So get this proper biology back into your soil, and come next spring, we should be able to get all of those seeds germinated and growing. your face doesn't look real happy. Okay, so question?
Oh. Thank you. Is it on? Yeah. Do you consider the bricks as a good indicator of how your soil is working?
Is bricks a good indicator of how your soil is working? So what is bricks? First of all, answer that question so everybody's on the same page. Bricks is where we take leaf material from your plant or stem material, something that's got plant sap in it, and we're going to squeeze that plant sap out and put a drop or two on a refractometer. And so you've got to get a uniform layer of your plant sap on the refractometer. You hold the refractometer up to sunlight. No other kind of light works. I'm sorry, you got to use some sunlight. So if it's a cloudy day out, do you have problems with not having enough sunshine in this part of the world? So remember that. You're going to hold it up, and the way that liquid refracts the light can tell you how much total solid is present in that sample. The more photosynthesis is occurring, the more exudates are being released out into the root zone. And so if you're assessing the health of your plant based on bricks, you get an idea of whether your plant is really working well or whether it's not working that well. As you go through a daily cycle, you do have to remember that your plant is not going to have a lot of solids, sugars mostly, in the plant sap early in the morning. So right at dawn, you don't want to be taking bricks. If it's a cloudy day, the bricks reading is going to be lower. If it's a cold day, the bricks reading is going to be lower. You've got to pay attention to those kinds of variabilities. And for that reason, the United States Department of Agriculture says bricks doesn't mean anything, and they poo-poo that as a measure of whether your plant is healthy or not. If you hold those factors, temperature, sunlight, cloudiness, if you hold those constant, then the bricks can become something very useful. Wine grapes, for example, they use bricks a lot because they're going to wait until they're at a certain condition with the wine grapes, and now they're going to look at the amount of total solid in the juice of the grapes. And so they're controlling the variability that way. Grapes themselves aren't that closely connected to photosynthesis in the plant. It's more the other processes that are going on in the ripening of the grape. So there's an exception to that rule. So a lot of people have tried to come up with values that different kinds of plants should have. We have a really interesting experiment going on in the United States with Dan Kittredge, where he sent out exactly the same kinds of seeds to 100 growers throughout the United States and asked that everybody grow these seeds in whatever system they're using to grow the plants, and then send that plant material back to him so he can assess what the nutrient concentration in that plant material is. And then he's plotting all of that information on a graph. So, same seed type, looking at the nutritional concentration, and basically the picture that he's getting is total scattered gram. It's the same genetics, but grown in all kinds of different conditions, and the nutrient concentration is all over the board, and it bears no relationship to the bricks. So we got a lot more work to do to really understand the usefulness of bricks for all different kinds of plants. It's not that I'm going to poo-poo bricks. It's just that we got some more work to do to understand what it's trying to tell us. Okay? Sure. Do I want to pick? Who's got a question? How about right here? Last question. I'm picking the guys in front because it's easier to get to them.
You didn't discuss crop rotations. How important are they?
When you put the proper biology back into the soil, crop rotation is something you don't have to do. Why are we told that we have to rotate crops? Because if you keep planting the same place in the same, over time, year after year after year, you're going to get massive amounts of diseases, right? Wrong. If the biology is good in your soil, if you maintain biology, no disease. Don't have to rotate crops. The other reason we're told we have to rotate crops is because over time we're removing all the nutrients from that soil. Excuse me? Is there like one plant that only has nitrogen in it? Only phosphorus? All plants require all of the nutrients in more or less the same concentrations. And if we maintain the biology in your soil, we're pulling those nutrients out of the sand, out of the silt, out of the clay, out of your rocks, out of your pebbles. Until the day you've lost all your rocks, all your pebbles, all your gravel, only after all of your parent material is gone, like when's that going to happen? Not until that day do you have to worry about rotation of your crops. You never run out of nutrients if you've got biology in your soil. So, why would you have to rotate your crops? Not necessary. Oops, the organic world just went ballistic.
We've got to get you to
Gotta go. Thank you.